March was my first month here. Anybody remember back that far? And the first month I was here, I gave a series of talks called On Living Your Best Life. And the first week I talked about identify. Second week I talked about commitment. And the third week I talked about principles that allow us to overcome life. And I don't know if you were here that Sunday, but I had 5 principles that I wanted to talk about. And I got through 3 of them. Right? And I don't usually, like if I say I'm going to teach 5 principles, I usually get to 5 principles. Sometimes I adjust them, but I get usually, and I didn't even get close. I was over time with 3, and I said, come back and I'll teach the other 2. So a lot of you came back the next week thinking I was going to teach the other 2. Well, guess what? It's a new day. So the Reverend Eileen and I have created a series of talks entitled Your Spiritual Toolbox. And we sat, alone and said, okay, come up with the most important spiritual tools that you think we all need in our toolbox. And I think you came up with like 27 or 23 or something. And I came up with 19. And we only have 9 weeks. So we decided to dedicate all of July and August to 9 spiritual tools that you need in your toolbox, that we all need in our toolbox. And each week, that tool gets its own Sunday. So we're not trying to jam 4 or 5 tools into one Sunday. You get a whole Sunday to play with one tool. And today I'm going to start with the tool that maybe has changed my life the most. And love is a pretty important thing to me. And this tool actually has had a bigger impact on my life. And it's the tool that is the law of expansion. And so the question I want to start with today is, how big of a life do you want to live? How big of a presence do you want to be in life? Because I really believe that that's kind of the core of all that we talk about. And last week I asked the house, the room, I said, how many of you were raised in a family that one of the things that you heard over and over again was not to be too big for your britches? Anybody heard that concept? And the idea was that our family, sometimes with all good intentions, sometimes shamed us for getting too big, too bright, too something. And the fear is that if we got too big for ourselves, that our family was going to take us out before anybody else could. Right? And it was really designed at some level as an act of love. Was the idea that I love you so much, I'm going to take you out first so nobody else has to. And yet the words of Jesus keep ringing in my ear, that you are the light of the world, so let your light so shine that others may see the good works and give glory to God. See, many of us, and culturally, have lived with the belief that smallness is safety. Many of us were taught that we're actually safer to be small. That we won't be noticed, we won't be seen, we are safe if we just stay underneath the radar. And what if today the spiritual principle, this law of expansion, is actually intended to keep you profoundly safe, not in being small, but being as big and as great and as amazing as God intended you to be. See, we have lived for thousands of years under this cultural belief that somehow smallness is safety. And what if it's not? What if it just allows us to only grow and evolve and expand to a certain level, and then we become, say it with me, too big for our britches, and then somebody who says they love us takes us down to size. And they do it with the best of intentions because they want to make sure that we're safe. And so what if the entire universe has been created Out of this, not the entire universe. What if the human mindset has created this false belief that smallness is safety and doesn't truly believe the spiritual truth that in your expanded nature, that is where God is. I am an ever-expanding expression of God. Will you say that with me? I am an ever-expanding expression of God. So the law of expansion states this, that your soul only does two things. You think, well, Richard, your soul's got to do more than two things. Nope. Your soul only does two things. And those two things is your soul is either expands or contract in the moment. That's all your soul will ever do is expand or contract over and over again. It either expands or contracts, and as your soul is expanding or contracting, the problem is that most people barely notice it's happening. So we're expanding and contracting and not even noticing that it's happening within us. So we're not doing it from a conscious awareness place. We are doing it from a very unconscious place. So we are expanding and contracting, not even realizing we're expanding and contracting, so we can't do it consciously, or we don't do it consciously. And what would happen if that expansion and contraction process became a conscious decision? That you could actually decide in a moment, do I want to expand into this moment, or do I want to contract into this moment? Now, we have free will. We have a God-given right to be as miserable as we want to be. So you can contract into any moment you want to get smaller in. But what I want you to see is the illusion that when you're contracting, somehow you're safer. It doesn't work that way. Will the bear eat you no matter how small you get? In fact, if you're dealing with a bear, we had a bear campus a couple of weeks ago. They have a video of me chasing the bear. I don't think it was really chasing. I think it was, I'm not sure what I was doing, but I won't let them show my wife that video because I don't think she'd be happy seeing me chase a bear. But it's the idea that if you're chasing a bear, is it better to look bigger or smaller? Bigger, right? It's bigger. And what I want you to see today is that your soul came to be magnificent. And we have to get over our fear of largeness, of greatness, of being spectacular, so that your soul can expand to the fullness of who you are. Let's take love. When you feel profound love, do you expand or contract? Expand. When you feel profound love, how big, how expanded are you when you feel profound love? What about fear? When you feel fear, do you expand or contract? Contract. Now, I want us to notice that, right? So in the moments where you are the most afraid, you are your smallest self. Does that make sense to anybody? Like, why in your moments of your greatest fear would you want to be your smallest self? You'd actually want to expand. When you're angry, are you expanding or are you contracting? Contracting. Most of us contract. When you hear great music, are you expanding or are you contracting? Expanding, right? When you're in conflict with someone you love, do you usually expand into that experience? Or do you contract into that experience? Contract. When you're in resentment, are you expanding or contracting? What about when you experience incredible beauty? Do you expand into that or do you contract into that? What about it when you get inspired? Do you expand into that or contract into your inspiration? What about shame? When you go into your deepest, darkest shame, do you expand into that or do you contract into that? See, what I want you to see is that we're contracting and expanding every day, but we're doing it completely unaware. That this whole law of expansion, that your soul can expand or contract. We do it over and over again, 100 times a day. We expand and we contract, we expand and we contract. And most of the time, we are literally unaware of it. And what would happen if in the moments you need to be your greatest self, you actually expanded instead of contracting? Now, you'd actually have to feel yourself. You'd actually have to become conscious that you're not only a physical being, but you're a spiritual being, that you're an energetic being. And in the moments where you need to expand the most, you'd have to become self-aware enough to say, oh, I'm contracting in this moment. What would it live like? How would I experience life differently in this moment if I expanded into this moment instead of contracted into it? And you might find that there's a whole nother level of intuition and power and possibilities that have never been available to you because you're now expanding to become big enough to hold that in whatever you're going through. Life asks us over and over again to expand, to become greater. Now, Albert Einstein said, you can't solve a problem at the level it was created. Now, in a two-dimensional world, everything is either up or down. True, because it's only two-dimensional. In a three-dimensional world, it's no longer just up and down. It's now the third dimension is width. And so you can't solve a problem at the level of contraction that created it. Does that make sense? So when you're having a problem, when you're having an issue, when there's a situation in your life, and you contract into it, we actually stay stuck. That we actually have to practice expanding beyond where we've ever been before. And for some of us, that turns on all the red lights. If you actually enter a time of meditation and you're expanding, it's like, this is beautiful. I'm grooving. I'm happy. Like, it's going great. Right? Until something happens, and the moment we get scared or anxious or shamed or in any way we get triggered, instantly we contract upon ourselves. And all the goodness that we just created, all the goodness that we just experienced, all the light and love and God and all the bigness that we were in that moment evaporates. And we are back to our small, little, frightened self, trying to solve the issues of today when all along you were never intended to be that small. Would God create you and give you a small, little soul in a vastly infinite universe? So the question then becomes, if we're not conscious of this expansion and contraction problem, situation, can we ever change it? And the answer is no. We actually have to become conscious of our own experience. In this moment, are you expanding or contracting? And we have to ask ourselves that question about 100 times a day. In this moment, am I expanding or am I contracting? In this moment, am I open to greater and greater and greater levels of good? Or this moment, am I contracting and pulling in and moving into my smallness? In ministry, for me, it's been a constant ask, how much am I willing to expand? My first ministry, the sanctuary held about 100 people. And we had about 60 or 75 people, my first ministry. And so when I speak, I want to make sure that I've expanded to include the whole room. And that way, the people in the back row, the front row, the middle row, every room, every spot, has an experience of me that feels intimate because my energy is big enough to hold the whole room. So doing that for 100 people was fairly easy. My second ministry, the sanctuary, sat 300 people. And there was a time when that ministry filled up that 300 people, went to 100 people in the overflow, and I had to practice because it was kind of a weird situation. It was kind of a narthex, and it was a little different. So I had to practice bringing my energy not only to the room, but filling that space. And then at one point, we were doing 4 services. So then I had to practice doing that over and over until we built our new church. And our new church held 1,000 people. 1,000 people. If you've ever been at Unity Phoenix, holds 1,000 people. And I had to be practiced in expanding my energy so that I could actually bounce it off all the walls. So that I wasn't just staying here, I was going out to there. And it changed. And then we went to TV. And that was a whole nother dimension, right? Now I not only had to fill the room, but I had to connect. I had to make sure my energy went out and touched the people on the TV. And now coming here, like I not only fill the room, but then you got to fill the outside chairs. And you got to go in and get the people in the chapel because they're sneaky and they hide in the chapel, right? So you got to make sure your energy fills the whole room. And over again, what I want you to see is that we can actually learn to live an expanded life. So how do we do that? The first that we actually have to begin to notice our own energy. Now, most of us were raised in an environment where we learned to notice other people's energy more than our own. We noticed if mom or dad were happy or sad, or if the moment felt safe, or we noticed the energy in the room, but we weren't always paying attention to our own energy. And the first principle of living this law of expansion is you actually have to notice where you are in your expansion-contraction paradigm. And so the first one is you got to notice. And then once you notice, you can actually set a goal to expand to become more. The second thing that you have to do is set an intention to expand. I intend to expand to be bigger than I've ever been before. I am an ever-expanding expression of God. Will you say that with me? I am an ever-expanding expression of God. Now, here's the point I'm trying to make. Our lives are better in every way when we are expanded. And why is that? Well, the first reason that your life is better when you're expanded is that when your soul is expanded fully, or any level, the more you expand, the more you can hold God's good. Does that make sense to everybody? If you're walking around with a tiny little soul, how much good can you hold? Not much, right? If you're expanding, you can hold more and more good. And in fact, people come to me and say, this goal or this desire that I have is bigger than I am. And I'm saying, well, that's a problem. They said, what do you mean? That life should be bigger than we are. No, not if you want to experience it. If you have a goal or a desire or even a problem, you have to become bigger than the goal. You have to become bigger than the problem, because if you never become bigger than the problem, guess what happens? The goal doesn't have room to fit in your soul, and the problem doesn't have room to get out. And many of us are living too small, and we have the same problem, we have the same issue, we have the same desire, and we don't see a change simply because we haven't expanded to become big enough for the fullness of who we are and to allow ourselves to be wildly blessed. So the first thing we have to do is the more you expand, the more you can hold good. 2, the more you can expand, the easier it is to heal. Now, why is that? How many of you have ever experienced deep grief? Anybody experienced deep grief? Yep. Now, what happens when we experience deep grief or deep anxiety or deep pain? What tends to happen is we tend to contract around the grief. We actually kind of just circle the grief, and it feels like the grief is all we are because we just have encircled it energetically. So because we've gotten small as the grief, we actually have no way to release it because we're not open to the energy of God moving that grief or moving that pain or moving that situation out of us. We've actually contracted around the grief because the grief is so intense. It really just kind of clogs up everything. And over again, what I want you to see in your moments of pain, grief, sadness, anxiety, that is absolutely not the time for you to contract. We were taught to contract, but it's actually the wrong moment. In the moments of deep despair, you actually need to expand to move that old energy out and to have room to bring in a new level of love and joy and peace and inspiration. And we get stuck. We get stuck in our pain. And some people have been stuck in grief literally for years because they've only expanded to the point where they can hold the intensity of that pain, and that's all the room they've created for themselves. If you're stuck, you are too small. If you have a problem that's reoccurring over and over again, you are too small. If you're stuck in pain, you are too small. 3, and this is where it gets really weird. 3 is the more you expand, the more permeable you become, and the more deeply content you are with life. Now, what does permeable mean? Permeable. Permeable is an adjective. If a substance is permeable, something such as water or gas can pass through it and fill it. And as an energy being, I want to be permeable. And what does that mean? Well, do you want the goodness of God to be able to easily come into your life? Do you want the pain of the past to be easily moved out of your life? Yes. So the more you expand, and I know permeable is a word in science, and most of us, when we think scientific terms, our eyes just kind of go down and we fall asleep. But the idea here is when you're expanding, you're actually able to hold more and more and to be more wildly blessed. Now, there's a whole nother feature of this. Not only when you expand and you become more and more permeable, the people that love you and the people that you love, you're able to have a deeper connection with them because you're now permeable. So you can let their love in and you can actually share your love with them because you're not stuck. You don't have your facade on. You don't have the walls up. The more you expand, the more permeable you become, the more you can give and receive the full power of love and blessings and joy and good because you're open and receptive. 4. As I talked about, 4 is the expansion allows you to overcome anything in life. How many of you remember the first time you fell in love? Anybody remember that far back? One of the things that happens when we tend to fall in love is that our soul expands rapidly. When you fall in love, there's this almost instant expansion that happens in love. We remember the Grinch movie, right? Where he falls in love and then his heart grows 5 times bigger, right? There's this expansion that happens in love. And one of the side effects of expansion is it eases in the ability to overcome life. It actually makes it easier for you to overcome. And so when we first fall in love, we feel like we can conquer the world. We know that whatever the problem, whatever the challenge, we can take that on. And that's what happens when you fall in love. You become bigger than life. And that's who we were meant to be. We were meant to be bigger than life. So one of the benefits of expansion is that you actually become bigger than life. And the 5th is probably the best. To fully embrace God, is God going to change? How many want to vote that God's probably not going to change? Right? So if God's not going to change and God is infinite, guess who has to change? Us. We have to change. If you want to embrace the infiniteness of God, is yours in your stuck smallness going to ever allow you to embrace the fullness of God? No, of course not. Then if we want to embrace the fullness of God, we actually have to expand to meet God where God is. Jesus said it this way. They say, lo, it is here or there, but behold, the kingdom of God is in the midst of you. The kingdom of God is in the midst of us, and yet we have to expand to embrace it. And this idea of expansion is that you can actually be big enough to embrace the infinite. But we have to kind of start where we are. You have to actually become bigger than your life. You have to become bigger than the problems in your life. You have to become bigger than the feelings in your life. You have to become bigger and greater than you've ever been before. And as you expand, you can actually align with the fullness of God. And because you're permeable, you actually begin to flow in and out of God. And God begins to flow in and out of you in the most dramatic and powerful and wonderful way. And it all starts when we decide that we're no longer safe in our smallness, but we want to be greater. We want to be more. We want to be filled with more light, more love, more peace, more power than we ever have before. And there was no way I could say that in 5 minutes. You ready for your homework? I want you to begin to pay attention to your own energy. And I really want you to begin to pay attention in every moment and to ask yourself the question, am I expanding or am I contracting? Am I getting smaller in this moment or am I becoming greater in this moment? And as we practice expanding beyond the old limits, beyond the old size, beyond the old thoughts, we actually can hold the fullness of God. God is infinite. And the way that we know our oneness with God is when we meet God where God is. We don't want a smaller God. We want to know a greater us. And when we know a greater us, we can actually flow into the divine as the divine flows in and through us. And it is a transformative moment. I am an ever-expanding expression of God. Will you say that with me? I am an ever-expanding expression of God. Pray with me. I invite you to open your mind, your heart, your soul to God. And I want you to feel your own expansion. Feel your soul being unleashed, untethered, unlocked. Feel your soul becoming more than you've ever been before. How big were you willing to be? How big of a presence are you willing to be in the world? How much light, how much love, how much power are you willing to hold? I am an ever-expanding expression of God. I am an ever-expanding expression of God. In the name and through the power of the living Christ, we give thanks. And so it is. Amen. God bless you all. Have a great week. Thanks for being here.